My name is Keenan and I'm here in East Sussex because unfortunately, COVID has meant we're not able to invite the next generation of young drivers to attend Safe Drive, Stay Alive this year. If you don't already know, Safe Drive, Stay Alive, or SDSA for short, usually brings together thousands of sixth formers and college students from East Sussex to hear from the emergency services, crash victims and their families about what can happen when young drivers get it wrong. So instead, we've created a pop-up cinema and invited small groups of friends to watch the speakers and share their reactions with us. The purpose isn't to scare anyone, because getting your first car is an amazing step towards freedom and independence. However, in 2019, 95 young people were killed or seriously injured in road traffic collisions on the roads of East Sussex, Brighton and Hove. Those most at risk are 16 to 24-year-olds, and we are asking for your support to help us get these important messages out to you, your friends, and your families. Ultimately, SDSA wants to positively influence the behaviour of young drivers and their passengers to reduce the number of people killed or seriously injured on the roads. In particular, raising awareness of what we call the fatal four. That is seatbelts, speed, distraction, and drink or drug driving. Okay guys, so we're ready to start to watch the film, but before we begin, let me ask you, any of you learning to drive, passed your tests?
I've taken my theory and I'm taking my driving test in a couple of months.
Ah, sweet. What about you two at the front?
I'm currently taking lessons, but I haven't done my test yet.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm doing lessons, but I'm still a bit nervous.
Are you all excited to pass your test?
Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant. Love it. Right, well, let's start the film, shall we?
Hi, my name is Duncan Bootland. I'm a doctor with Air Ambulance Kent, Surrey and Sussex, and I'm the clinical lead for major trauma at the Royal Sussex County Hospital, the major trauma centre for Sussex. I see patients involved in serious road traffic incidents at the scene, in the A&E department, on the intensive care unit and on the trauma ward. I want to tell you about an autumn night not so long ago. We were called out on the air ambulance at 3 a.m. to 3 patients who'd been returning from a night out. One of the patients, Nick, has given me permission to tell this story. The car had crashed head-on into a tree, and on our arrival at the scene, the fire and rescue, ambulance and police services were all already present. The rear seat passenger, who'd been wearing his seatbelt, was up and walking around. He'd sustained only cuts and minor injuries. It sounds like a cliche, but his seatbelt had not only saved his life, but allowed him an almost miraculous escape. I looked into the car, and in the driver's seat was a young man slumped forward. He had sustained an obvious serious head injury, and he was obviously dead. The ambulance team leader told me they'd declared him dead, as there was nothing that could be done. I was struck by the fact that all the teams were working around and in the car, but to all intents and purposes, we weren't paying attention to this young man. We'd deal with him when we had the chance. It would horrify me to think that one of my loved ones might die like that, and it haunts me that there's little dignity in the first moments after death for people like this. I moved my attention to Nick in the front passenger seat. Nick was unconscious and critically ill, but the wreckage of the car had trapped him and it had taken some time to get him extricated. He was being pulled from the car as we arrived. Nick was unconscious, only occasionally groaning. His pupils were dilated and not reacting to light. This is what happens when you die. His blood pressure was 60/40 and the oxygen levels in his blood were unrecordable. Nick was on the cusp of death. And we did what we're trained to do. We gave Nick an emergency general anaesthetic, put a tube in his throat to allow us to support his breathing, cut holes in the side of his chest to release any pressure around his lungs, and began a blood transfusion through intravenous lines we placed in his arms. He began to stabilise, and we moved him to hospital. Nick spent 3 weeks on intensive care, and although ICU is an amazing place where they do incredible things to save your life, it can also be an incredibly difficult experience as a patient, and not one I would ever want to go through. Nick spent a further 6 weeks in hospital and many, many months in rehabilitation. He made a recovery, and although he lost the hearing in one ear and will take many months to return to work, he's lucky. Nick's lucky. He's probably the sickest patient I've ever seen survive, but don't underestimate the challenges he had to go through. His friend in the back seat didn't need to be lucky, and I'm absolutely certain that that was largely because of his seatbelt. As a doctor, it's not the blood and gore that upsets me. It's knowing that the tragedy of some events is totally avoidable. Safe drive, stay alive.
Quick straw poll, hands up, who wears their seatbelt all the time? Okay, brilliant. Now, how do you feel about if someone sits in your car and doesn't wear their seatbelt?
They wouldn't be getting in my car without a seatbelt on.
I think I'd ask them to put their seatbelt on, but I'm not sure I would with the social pressure.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. Like, I'd want them to put the seatbelt on, but I think it kind of depends on the scenario.
Well, an easy way to deal with that is just by saying, my car, my rules. If they're going to get in, they have to wear their seatbelt. And if you're the passenger, you can just actively choose to leave. You don't have to get in the car.
Yeah.
Hi guys, hope you're well. Take a seat.
My name is Teresa Brogan, and I'm a police officer currently working in the Casualty Reduction Team as part of the Sussex Safer Roads Partnership. My role is quite simply as it sounds. Our aim is to reduce the number of those killed or seriously injured on the roads in Sussex. When I was on a night shift once, I remember a call came over the air of a single vehicle road traffic collision on the A259 along the seafront. The first officers on scene were actually firearms officers, and they immediately updated that this was a potential fatal collision. Moments later, the update came that it was potentially a double fatal. These are not the updates you really want to hear over the air during your shift. I rushed to the scene with my sergeant and was met with what I can only describe as a horrific sight. A sight you can never get used to. A sight that sadly is all too familiar to me and my colleagues. The driver of the car, a young man, probably not much older than yourselves, has sustained catastrophic head injuries and could not be saved. I watched as the paramedics and doctors left him where he sat and worked tirelessly to save the life of his young female companion next to him. The sight of the young man, with his eyes wide open, is something I will not ever forget. From every angle, I felt his eyes were looking directly at me. Once you see something like this, you can't unsee it. I travelled with the young girl in the ambulance and watched on as they managed to save her life in the A&E department at Brighton Hospital, although she had life-changing injuries. I went home and yet again hugged my children just a little bit longer as they headed off to school in the morning. It transpired that the young man had borrowed his friend's car, a car he probably wasn't used to, and had gone into the city for a night out with friends, where he met the young girl for the first time and offered to drive her home. But he had taken cocaine and had been drinking, and made a decision to get in the car and drive. It was probably the last decision he made that night. I joined Sussex Police because I wanted to make a difference. I didn't want to be a detective or a firearms officer or even a police dog handler. I wanted to be a family liaison officer, a voluntary additional role that I have held now for over 12 years. It's my job to be deployed into families when they have received the news that their loved one has died suddenly or unexpectedly. It doesn't get any easier explaining to a mother or a father that their son or daughter has died in a road traffic collision. No parent really expects to outlive their children. I have to explain to them about procedures immediately following the crash and during the sometimes protracted police investigation that follows. Difficult conversations have to take place about post-mortem examinations to establish a cause of death, and I help them with seeing their loved one's body. How do you explain how their child now looks as opposed to when they last saw them? Sometimes I've had to go into very minute detail about the injuries a loved one has sustained because some families want to know every detail, others less so. If I can stop you from driving a car whilst under the influence of either drink or drugs, then I have made a difference. Don't let my next deployment be to your family. Safe drive, stay alive.
So, how are you feeling after watching that?
It's kind of like upsetting because you don't want anyone to have to be put in that situation, like where they have to go and tell someone's family the news and like anyone to have to receive that information. You feel sorry for the family as well who are hearing the news, and yeah, it's just quite upsetting.
Yeah, do you know what? I feel quite angry towards the boy. Like, one, he wasn't even using his own car, it was his friend's car, so that's not right in the first place. And two, he literally brought that girl into that situation and she had no clue what she was getting into. And personally, that's made me feel a lot more aware. Like, if I feel like I'm not in the right situation, like I will take more notice into things and just be a lot more alert and aware.
You'd feel like you'd take more responsibility, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Hi guys, anyone here learning to drive? Passed any tests?
I'm learning to drive, but I haven't done any tests yet.
Same, learning to drive, I haven't done tests.
I have my theory test in 2 months.
Oh, nice. Are you nervous?
Nah.
Love it, very good. Does anyone here get driven around by friends who have recently passed their tests?
Yeah, quite a lot, yeah.
Nah,
not
haven't,
some.
no.
Okay, you two. Between you and me, are they good drivers?
Not all of them, no.
Some of them.
I see. Okay, we'll chat more after the film.
Hi, I'm Ali Reynolds and I live in Bexhill. I'm here to share my son's story in the hope that it will give you some insight into how a moment's distraction at the wheel can impact on a family forever. I have 3 children. Lee had just celebrated his 21st birthday. Carly was 3 years younger, and Georgina, the youngest, 10 years younger than Lee. Their father and I had divorced, and Lee took up the role of the head of the household. Lee lit up a room when he walked in with his energy and enthusiasm for life. He had such a caring nature and always wore the most engaging smile. He was also the biggest softie. Even at 6'2", he just adored his nan, his sisters and me, and was very protective of us all. Lee had been out one Sunday evening with Carly and friends when I received a text from him at 11 p.m. telling me he was on his way home. He never got home that night. His car was involved in a head-on collision with a transit van on a sharp bend. It was a dark February night and had been raining heavily. We later learnt it had taken the emergency services over an hour to cut him free from his car. He'd been trapped by his legs, but was conscious the entire time. And to this very day, I still worry about how scared he must have been during this time. Several hours after I arrived at the hospital, we learnt exactly how seriously injured Lee was. He'd undergone surgery to mend his badly broken leg. They'd operated to remove his spleen, and he had catastrophic internal injuries. Both lungs were badly damaged, and one of his lungs had completely collapsed. Due to the severity of Lee's injuries, he'd been put into a medically induced coma and was now on life support. When we were eventually allowed to see Lee the next morning in intensive care, I was not prepared for the sight that faced me. Lee laid there deathly white, with only the machines breathing for him. There were so many tubes and wires and monitors. Lee remained that way for the next 6 days, until it was explained to us that tests had now proved Lee was clinically brain stem dead. We were told very gently that there was no hope of Lee ever regaining consciousness. Next, we were being spoken to by organ donor coordinators. They asked if we would consider donating any of Lee's organs. We'd never discussed this, but we agreed. We didn't want Lee's young life to be a waste. Something good must come of it. Carly and I kept going over and over the events of that dreadful night. Was Lee driving too fast, as he usually did? Was he chatting on his phone? Or was it the text message that he'd sent to me that caused him to be on the wrong side of the road and in the path of that oncoming vehicle? I had told Lee many, many times that he needed to slow down before he killed someone, but he didn't listen. I never believed the person he would kill would be himself. The weeks following Lee's death passed, and then came news of the organ recipients. 2 people had regained their eyesight after receiving Lee's corneas. A lady had received Lee's liver and was doing well. And the gentleman who received Lee's kidneys is still alive to this very day. Because of my son, this man is still enjoying his life with his family. And I can't begin to tell you how proud that makes me feel. Lee's life and death was not a waste after all. I just hope that after watching this video, you'll realise what chaos can be wreaked on a family by just one moment of thoughtlessness behind the wheel. And I pray that none of your mothers will ever experience the pain I live with every day. We'll never really come to terms with losing Lee, but we get great comfort from knowing that several people benefited. And Lee giving that ultimate gift has shaped who we are as a family today. But every time I see on social media another one of Lee's friends getting engaged, getting married, or having their babies, just makes me so incredibly sad to think if he'd just listened every time I'd nagged him to drive more carefully, to think, to slow down, he may still be with us today.
So earlier you alluded to your friends who have recently passed their tests not being the best of drivers. Is speeding an issue?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Sometimes make you feel like a bit uncomfortable as well.
Yeah, they're just trying to show off sometimes.
Do you speak up?
Yeah, I would.
No, I just feel a bit awkward.
So you're about to pass your theory. What sort of driver do you think you'll be?
So I've always watched movies and they do speed a lot in movies. But after watching this video, I've realised that I would be inexperienced after I pass, so I'm definitely going to keep it steady.
I agree, after watching that, it just makes me want to try and talk up because I'd never want my mum or anyone in my family to feel like that about me.
So, show of hands, who has passed their tests? Who is learning? Who's not learning at all? Show of hands, who has a mobile phone? Now keep your hands up if you know somebody that uses their phone whilst they're driving. Be honest.
Hi, my name is Chris. I was 19 years old when I passed my driving test. I had one minor accident shortly after, but that aside, I considered myself a safe driver. I never drove excessively fast or dangerous, and I always wore my seatbelt. For the majority of my adult life, I drove a van for work. My licence was very important to me, and I didn't want to do anything to jeopardise it. There was one thing that I was ignorant to, though, and that was using my mobile phone. It isn't that bad, really. What's all the fuss about? That was my attitude when my parents would whinge at me and tell me to be careful and not use it whilst driving. And then I got caught by the police. That's when I got my first 3 points. But my attitude didn't change. I got caught again and attended a mobile phone awareness course. As soon as I'd finished the course, I was straight back on my phone on the drive home. On August 12, 2015, which was also coincidentally my son's birthday, on a beautiful summer's day, my whole family got together to celebrate my little boy's special day. What a great day it was. When the party finished and it was time to take my son home, we got into my transit van and started the 15-minute journey back to where he lived with his mum. 5 minutes into the journey, as I'm heading along the dual carriageway at roughly 60 miles an hour, I received a text. As I always did, I picked up my phone to read it. It was from a friend asking my plans for the rest of the evening. And like I always did, of course, I had to reply. At 60 miles an hour along a busy road with my son next to me, I took my eyes off the road to text out the reply. My phone beeped again. I picked it up. That's when my whole life changed forever. As I looked back up to the road, a few feet in front of me, there was a man cycling. I slammed my brakes on, but it was too late. I could not stop in time. He came up on the windscreen, right where my son was strapped into his seat. The windscreen smashed from the impact, showering my 4-year-old son in glass. The cyclist had his feet clipped into the pedals of his bike and was dragged under the van, crushed by the 2-ton weight of the vehicle. I'll never forget the image as I watched him in the rearview mirror roll out under the back wheel and into the road. What happened next is far too distressing to share. The seriously injured man was taken to hospital by air ambulance. 4 hours later, I was sat there in a police car. There was a knock on the window and the officer asked me to step out of the car. I had asked to be updated on the cyclist's condition. I was then told something which makes me feel as sick now as the moment I heard it. Despite the doctors' and surgeons' best efforts, they were unable to save his life, and unfortunately he had died several minutes earlier. I was in utter shock. I threw up and burst into tears. I was then arrested for causing death by dangerous driving and spent 14 hours in police custody being questioned. I was then taken home where the stark reality of the situation really began to set in. I was on bail for nearly a year. I tried to plea bargain to a lesser crime than the one I had been charged with, but due to not being completely honest about my actions when questioned and my poor history of mobile phone use behind the wheel, my plea was rejected. In a shameful attempt at self-preservation, I had deleted the messages at the scene of the accident. I was eventually found out, so I changed my plea a week before trial and pleaded guilty to causing death by dangerous driving. On Monday, the 5th of September 2016, I was sentenced to 9 years in prison, and I was also banned from driving for 14 and a half years. Prison by design is not a nice place to be, and although I've used my time inside to gain new skills, grow up a lot, and really learn about myself, it has on the whole been a very negative experience, more so for my family than me. If you can take one thing away from my story, then let it be this. There are two worst-case scenarios. One is me. Take it from me, prison completely ruins yours and your loved ones' lives. And that is the better of the two options. The other is guilt and regret. Words cannot express those feelings, but I have to live with that each day. I hope the next time you consider using your mobile phone whilst driving that you think of me. I thought it would never happen to me, but here I am today sharing my story, and after this, I'm going back to prison. Safe drive, stay alive.
So, any initial thoughts after watching that?
Was that actually real, or is he like an actor?
Well, unfortunately, it is real. Chris was on a day release from prison to come and tell his story.
I don't know, it's a difficult one, because I think we're all guilty that when we all put our hands up, we were all guilty of knowing someone that uses their mobile phone while driving.
We're all too comfortable with knowing the fact that someone we know has used their mobile phones while driving. And we don't only just feel his guilt in the video, but our guilt as well, that we are comfortable with that.
I think, me personally, I know quite a lot of people that cycle on the road, so it kind of hit home for me because, to me, the cyclist, he didn't make that choice. It was Chris who made the choice. And that cyclist that could be someone's brother, husband, boyfriend, dad. You know, he has a family. His family's life was destroyed. And that was because of Chris's choice. He had no say in the matter, but Chris had a choice in that situation.
I think what resonated most with me after watching that video is that Chris mentioned he had a small child in the passenger seat, and as someone who is still learning to drive, someone who has sat in that passenger seat, and I'm always looking over my shoulder at the habits my friends and my father make, I think it would be really easy to me to slip into those habits. So
yeah, exactly, and I think it kind of gives us an open eye on what we really need to do while driving and what is important and what is not important, like looking at a text or, you know, answering a call. And if that's going to cost someone's life, we really need to think about what is more important when we are driving as teenagers.
You're absolutely right. We're all too comfortable with it. But what are we going to do about it?
in the future, I think, as I'm getting in the car, making sure that the phone is out of reach and not distracting, and if it is out, it's on safe drive mode, and that if I am a passenger, I'm not going to be bystanding and I'm going to speak up and talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're all a lot more aware of it now, and we can use that in our power to speak up. And on the way home, I'm definitely going to do that.
Thank you. Right, thank you very much. See you later. Thanks. Thank you.
My name is Susan. I'm the Road Safety Coordinator for East Sussex Fire and Rescue. So I'm guessing the majority of you are learning to drive or are already driving. Most of you are probably passengers in cars driven by friends who have only recently passed their test. It's a whole new chapter and it's great. Think about what motivates you to want to learn to drive and get your licence. Now, having asked that question many times, the resounding answer is always freedom. And once you've got it, you won't want to lose it. So with that in mind, there's a few things you'll want to know. Number one, a few years ago, it was a slap on the wrist fine and 3 points for using your mobile phone whilst driving. That's all changed. It's now 6 points and a hefty fine, which means if you get caught once in the first 2 years of driving, you're immediately back to L plates and will need to pay for more lessons, the cost of retaking the test, and the big one, car insurance. It's expensive enough anyway, but when you have to tick the box that says you've lost your licence, it will be eye-watering. Freedom gone. Number two, for years, drivers were blasé about drug driving because there was no real effective way of testing at the roadside. But that has all changed too. Police can now test you in the same way they do drink drivers, and the penalties are the same too. A minimum 12-month ban, 6 months in prison, a £5,000 fine, and a criminal record. Freedom gone. Number three, even if you knew the last two, I'm pretty sure you won't know this. The frontal lobe of the brain, the part responsible for emotion regulation, risk management, and effective eye scanning, doesn't fully develop until your mid-20s. So you are at a biological disadvantage just by being young. There's not much you can do about speeding up your brain development, so the best thing you can be is aware of it and focus on some of the things that you can do. The one thing always under your control is the choices that you make. So try and make conscious decisions as a driver or passenger. For example, always wear your seatbelt. In a crash, you are twice as likely to die if you don't. Don't drink and drive, take drugs and drive, or drive tired. Get more experience in different weather conditions, on different roads, and allow passengers into the car gradually. Try and avoid the temptation of loading your car for a road trip straight after passing your test. Slow everything down. The fact is that 1 in 4 new drivers will crash in the first 2 years. If you're going to be one of that 25%, then at least be slower and the consequences less severe. Never drive over the speed limit, but remember too that it's not a target. Drive at the speed you're comfortable with and which is suitable for the road conditions. Lastly, I want to leave you with this. Maybe it'll be obvious to you, maybe it won't. But try to imagine dropping a stone into a pond. You get ripples. If you liken that stone to a fatal road traffic collision, the ripples are the people affected. Mums, dads, brothers, sisters, families, your friends, teachers, your community. But it also affects us, the emergency services. We get caught up in the aftermath of these horrific incidents. Your actions have consequences, but these can be positive too. Driving is great. It gives you independence and freedom. All I ask is please remember, make the right choices, develop good driving behaviours, and safe drive, stay alive.